Charles Foster must be England's answer to Indiana Jones. Not just an explorer, writer and theologian, Charles Foster is also a barrister and lecturer in medical law and ethics at Oxford University. Only in his 40s, Charles has already had an unusual and very interesting life. I'm really delighted to meet you, Charles Foster.
Great to meet you too.
I've done a little bit of reading and research, and
dear.
I know, but you are truly an interesting, intriguing, and fascinating man.
Well, those three words cover a multitude of sins.
Well, your journey of life and faith and discovery has been an adventure. Would you say that?
Certainly, yeah. My knuckles have been white for a lot of my life. Yes.
Well, let's find out a little bit more about who Charles Foster is. I mean, you studied at Cambridge. What did you study when you were there?
I studied veterinary medicine and I also studied law. So I emerged from Cambridge with a law degree and also qualified to remove the reproductive apparatus from animals.
And then when you graduated, what did you do?
Well, I put on a wig and a gown and dribbled away to judges for a bit, and I still do that sometimes. I did some veterinary medicine, and I got bored with being kicked and gored and trampled in the early hours of the morning. And I had various research jobs in veterinary medicine, and I walked around the Middle East for a fair amount of time, writing articles for various journals and magazines.
And you were a research assistant to who? The most influential lawyer in Israel.
I was a research assistant to Aaron Barak,
Yes.
who was a judge of the Supreme Court of Israel and later its Chief Justice, who's been a big influence on my life. Yes.
Wow, so that was a fascinating time.
That was amazing. And the Holy Land has been a huge influence on me in various ways. Yes.
And now, so what do you do now? How would you describe what you do?
As confused and confusing is really the answer.
Yes.
But I'm an academic at the University of Oxford, so
Yes.
I teach people who are hugely cleverer than me and hope not to be found out. I still work as a barrister
Yes.
for some of my time. I write books, I write articles, and I try to be a husband and father to my anarchic children.
Yes, your wife is Mary, and how many children have you got?
5 children, yes.
So you teach in Oxford. What do you teach?
I teach medical ethics and law. The law which I teach is medical law.
Yeah.
The ethics which I teach is concerned with everything from before conception to after death.
Really?
So, big questions.
Lots of very big questions. Now, when it comes to faith, have you been a person that has always had faith?
No. I've always been a person who's wondered what on earth we're doing on this extraordinary planet, and I've searched for a long time to find the answers, but it wasn't until about 12 years ago at Holy Trinity Brompton in London that something happened to me which changed the course of my life radically.
Charles, tell us, what was it that happened then?
Well, before that, I had flirted with Christianity, and
Yes.
indeed I'd professed it and indeed preached it. But it didn't really make sense. In the early hours of the morning, I knew that I was lying to myself. And then I went on an expedition to Sinai. I used to spend a lot of my life on expeditions, wandering after camels. And on this expedition...
Where did you go?
This was in the Sinai. This was a coast-to-coast expedition in Sinai, just me and 2 Bedouin chaps.
Yes.
And I mistimed the expedition massively, which meant that I had far too much time on my hands. These Bedouins spoke a version of Arabic which I didn't understand, and so I was left gazing at my own navel for a lot of the day and a lot of the night. And I thought this would be fascinating.
Yes.
The chance to look at the extraordinary soul of Charles Foster. So I looked inside myself, and I was horrified to find that there was nothing there. It was like looking down into this empty, echoing well. And I thought this was just an artifact of loneliness of where I was. I thought it would go away when I got back to Alexandria. It didn't. I thought it would go away when I saw a number 8 bus back in London.
Yes.
And it didn't. And to cut a very long story short, I found myself at HTB,
Yes.
a place which had always been a place of which I've been extremely suspicious.
Right.
All this hysterical charismania.
Yes. So
Not me.
You'd heard of
Not
all
me.
that.
Yeah, I'm extremely English. I'm extremely
Yes.
conservative. I have tweed underpants, metaphorically.
So did a friend invite you?
No, I didn't have friends at a place like that.
So how did you end up going?
I had heard that this place did things to people, that people experience things there which
Yes.
changed the course of my life. And I had come to the point when I needed something doing very radically. So I
Yes.
found myself in this very alien environment, and what I experienced was that this void, which I had looked down into in Sinai, was being filled. It was an almost physical feeling of being filled from the toes to the top of my head, and love and peace and acceptance flowed with it. And tears came. I don't do tears.
Yeah.
I didn't at that point. I didn't really have the theological language to describe what was going on. All I knew was that, rather like the man born blind,
Yes.
I went there empty, and I came out full. And that was the start
Yes.
of the journey which I've been following since.
So would you say that was 12 years ago?
Yes.
That experience was like a spiritual epiphany?
Yes. A spiritual epiphany, a dramatic encounter. It was intensely personal, very different from the propositional
Yes.
way in which I'd previously described my own faith to myself. And it changed me forever.
So what ways has it changed you?
It's given me peace, it's given me purpose, it's given me a confidence that whatever routes I go down, I won't be alone, that whatever questions I ask,
Yes.
there will be satisfactory answers. It's given me, I don't like the word, but a groundedness,
Yes.
which I have seen both emotionally and intellectually as the launching pad for everything I've done since.
And then after you had this experience, this epiphany, did you start calling yourself a Christian, a follower of Jesus?
Yes.
Yeah. And how did you then move on into the things that you're currently doing?
I became fascinated with the person that I had met that day in HTB.
Yes.
And I wanted to know more about him. And that seemed to me to require an intellectual effort as
Yes.
well as an emotional one, like every relationship. And I suppose my background gave me various intellectual tools which allowed me to go down the routes which you're describing.
Yes.
In trying to understand what that relationship was all about.
Well, yes. So now your most recent book is called Wired for God. The subtitle, The Biology of Spiritual Experience. What does that mean?
Well, we all have spiritual experiences, whether we're Christian or Muslim or no religion at all. I was interested to know what we could conclude from those spiritual experiences. I was interested to know what we could conclude from the fact that lots of our most treasured spiritual experiences can be reproduced fairly accurately,
Yes.
with drugs or with tantric sexual practice,
Yes.
or by dancing around a Kalahari bushfire or whatever.
And did you see these? I mean, did you see some of those things in person?
Yes, I mean, I have spent a fair amount of my life shuffling around the world, and
Yes.
I've seen some very strange things.
Yes.
I wanted to know how these experiences related to the God in whom I was so passionately interested, and the human beings made in his image in whom I'm so passionately interested.
Having researched and written this book, Charles, would you say that people here on this earth, we're wired for God?
Yes. It's impossible, in my view, to make sense of these spiritual experiences that everybody on the planet has,
Yes.
without suggesting that they're there for a purpose.
Right.
We seem to have pathways in our brains, pathways in other parts of our bodies, which make us receptive to God, to something outside ourselves. And it seems to me that the naturalistic explanations for those pathways just don't work.
Sure.
So that leads me to ask the question, why are they there? Often those experiences confer a detriment. You know, they exact an evolutionary cost,
Yes.
for example. No sensible Darwinian would have implanted them there.
Yes.
Why they're there? Answer, it seems to me, most naturally, they're there because something outside ourselves wants to communicate with us,
Yes.
wants to have a relationship with us. Because the most intimate of these spiritual experiences, ubiquitous across the world, are intensely personal ones. Yes, people talk about experiences of oneness with the universe and all that sort of stuff. But those sorts of experiences are terribly rare. The really common sorts of experiences are encounters with a presence and encounters with a benign presence.
Yes.
Something's trying to get through.
But you know, Charles, that's something. As Christians, we believe the invisible God became visible in Jesus. Now, there are many people around the world who would say that they have religious experiences, and they're connecting with this power, but wouldn't call that power Jesus. How authentic are other people's spiritual experiences? And do you think ultimately it is Jesus, but they just don't know it's Jesus?
I think in many cases, what you said is absolutely true. The fact that somebody is not a professing Christian doesn't
Yes.
mean that they don't have experiences which are authentically spiritual, which are authentically derived from God who's desperate to get through to each of us. The fact that every human being is made in the image of God should suggest that every human being, Christian or not, is likely to be wooed by him.
Yes.
And spiritual experience is one of the sorts of wooing conversations that God has with us. Doesn't mean to say, of course, that everything which is described as a spiritual experience is of God. There's lots of bogus stuff out
Yes.
there. There's lots of harmful stuff out there. We've got to be very careful in slapping the label authentically spiritual on things which go on in our neurons.
Sure.
But there is lots of real God-generated prompting going on, even though the person who's prompted doesn't articulate those things in a way which would be acceptable in an
Sure.
evangelical church.
Okay, now you would say that you've had an authentic Christian experience that is real.
Yes.
But you also have had personal experience of, would it be appropriate to say, counterfeit religious experiences?
Yes.
Okay, how do we discern what the difference is? It's a bit like having a counterfeit note, isn't it? You know, how do you know? Because sometimes it is just so like the real thing that you don't realise it's counterfeit. How do we discern that?
Well, fruits are important, and long-term ability to bear fruit. In other words, the consistency of A, the experience, and B, the things which those experiences generate. And for the Christian as well, whether those experiences are validated by Scripture. So if a particular spiritual experience suggests that you should be leaving your wife and going off with someone else, it's
Yes.
not an authentically spiritual experience.
No.
In the way that we've been talking about.
So, obviously there are people in the world who don't think that we've been made in the image of God, who don't believe that we're wired for God. So how do we convey to them that there is a God and that he's real and that he wants us to connect with him?
Well, one of the methods is the one which I have used in this book.
Yes.
To point out that everybody has spiritual experiences and that naturalistic explanations for these spiritual experiences just don't wash.
Sure.
So all the psychological theories which suggest that the idea of God and related spiritual experiences are generated by a look back to a childhood golden age, it's nonsense. Attempts to explain away the origins of religion are intellectually destitute. I set out the reasons why in this book. So that's a good starting point. And then go on to ask the question, okay, you've got these curious things happening inside your head. They're suggesting to you that something outside yourself that cares very deeply about you wants to get in touch. Why don't you ask a little more about why that should be and who that person might be?
Sure. Now, you've written other books. Could you mention some of the other subjects that you've covered in your other books?
I've just written a book on pilgrimage, which looks at the thesis that God loves nomads, God loves wanderers.
Yes.
I look at the Cain and Abel story, and I look at what seems to me to be a bias to
Yes.
The marginalised, to the people who wander through the edges of places.
Yes.
And I suggest in that book that we need to go back to the edges where God is to be found. There's another book.
Yeah, but on that, I remember when I saw Crocodile Dundee, and I thought, he went for his walkabout, and I was thinking, I'd like to go for a walkabout, but it's a little bit difficult sometimes, isn't it, when you've got responsibilities and sort of parameters in your life and family, just go to the edges.
Well, you can go on a pilgrimage when you take your son to school. I do every morning. It's a precious time, and the edginess can be a metaphorical edginess if that's all you can get. But
so basically, it's seeing the value within the constraints of our lives that much of what we do can have the experience of being a pilgrimage.
Well, yes. But I wouldn't want to say that metaphorical pilgrimage is as good as literal pilgrimage. There is something quite special because we are embodied creatures with legs and appetites,
Yes.
about actually getting that body up and walking along a road. I think things historically happen when we do that.
Yes, yes.
It sorts us out in a way in which just sitting in our armchairs and thinking about ourselves as pilgrims can't.
Yes. But the whole nomadic thing, I find that quite exciting. And obviously, you've been through the Sahara Desert on camels.
Yes.
How long did that take?
Oh, well, I've been on many expeditions
Yes.
in the Sahara, in the Danakil Depression, in Ethiopia, in Namibia, in Sinai, in various other deserts of the world. So quite a lot
What's
of
the
my life
longest
has been
time that you've spent in the desert?
6 or 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, with just a few Bedouin?
Yes, often with people I can't speak to really. Lonely times. I'm not quite sure why I do that.
In the middle of nowhere.
Yes, yes. It exposes your inadequacies very cruelly.
But miles and just miles of sand.
Yes, and I don't like sand anymore. I much prefer lush, leafy places now.
But were there times where you felt concerned that you were in the middle of nowhere?
Yes.
Barrenness, wilderness.
Yes. And there is an ascetic streak in me which took me to those places, and I think I'm beginning to get over that now.
But then you did
I don't feel I've got to whip myself.
No.
In quite the way that I did.
But then you went to the North Pole.
I did go to the North Pole. Not all of me came back and said, "Look, have you seen that?"
Oh yes.
Yeah, I
frostbite.
got frostbite through a combination of stupidity and arrogance. I have the frostbitten tip of my finger in a little box upstairs, which I take out sometimes and rattle at lectures.
So getting to the North Pole, just explain it. How do you actually get there? Where did you start?
I started my journey on the Russian side.
Right.
So went to Spitsbergen, then
Yeah.
took a plane which landed at a Russian base, landed on the ice,
Yes.
and started skiing north. And we were on the ice for a total of 2 weeks, and then we were mercifully pulled out by helicopter once we got to the North Pole, once our GPSs said
Yes.
naught.
That you'd got there,
Yeah.
you got picked up.
Yeah.
So how many
Bit of a
hours
cop-out.
a day skiing?
I suppose about 12, 13, 14 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you have
I don't really recommend it.
No, did you have to train to do that? Or...
Yeah, we were living in London at the time, so I used to pull tractor tyres around Victoria Park, looked at by bemused dog walkers.
Yes. And to build up your stamina and strength.
Yeah, it's a wonderful excuse to eat lots of butter and cake. Yeah, I was even fatter, if you can imagine it, then than I am now.
But then, obviously, that 2 weeks, you lost it.
Yeah, you burn off quite a bit.
Burn off,
Yeah.
wow. And so when you got to the North Pole, what did you do?
Sat there, listened to the helicopter,
Yes.
played cards,
Yes.
urinated into a plastic bottle, and dreamt about steak and chips.
Yeah, getting home.
Yeah.
How would you describe your feeling about you get to the North Pole? What did you feel in terms of where you were geographically?
I would love to be able to give you a romantic answer to that question, but I just felt cold, and there was a tremendous sense of anticlimax, and I thought, I'd like to be out of here, and I've done this now.
I've done it.
I can tick it off on the CV. What do I do next?
So you've done the Sahara, you've done the North Pole, you've done various other things. What do you still want to do?
There are a lot of questions that I still want answered. There are a lot of books I want to write. I want to spend a lot more time than I have done up till now playing in the park with my children.
Yes.
There are a lot of students I want to teach.
Yes.
There are still some journeys that I want to do, still some fairly big desert journeys for reasons which, now that you come to ask me about them, I'm completely unsure about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of like now, your priorities at this stage in your life, obviously married to Mary with all your children, is to be a husband, father. You're a teacher, lecturer.
Yes.
You're a barrister.
Yes.
And then within all of that mix, endeavour to grapple with some other issues that are buzzing in your head.
Yes. So I'm engaged in the moment on a book on the whole notion of human dignity. How does that concept operate in the operating theatre, in the doctor's consultation room? I'm interested passionately in some questions of biblical archaeology. So a week ago I was in Jerusalem looking at this whole issue of the alleged Jesus family tomb.
Yes.
Did they really dig up Jesus and his family in a tomb in Talpiot? The answer is no.
No. So where did that come from?
Well, that
the
was
idea.
I wrote a little while ago a book called The Jesus Inquest, which
Yes.
looked at the evidence for and against the resurrection of Jesus. Since the first edition of that book, the book Talpiot Tomb story blew
Yes.
up, so I decided it needed to be dealt with. So I've just come back from talking to lots of archaeologists and wondering just how likely it is that Christianity is a fairy tale.
Yes. So why is it, Charles, that every couple of years someone writes a new book on a new idea that conflicts with biblical teaching? Where do people get these ideas from? And why do these ideas become a success or appear to become very popular?
I think it's immensely encouraging. It indicates that people deep down are fascinated with Jesus.
Yeah.
So the Da Vinci Code, classic example.
Yes.
What an amazing opportunity. It got people talking about Jesus in pubs.
Yes.
Same with the Talpiot Tomb story.
Yes.
It denotes that deep down Jesus strikes a chord even with those people who profess no particular interest in him.
As I said to Charles at the beginning, you are a very interesting, intriguing man, and definitely I find you quite stimulating, and I've really enjoyed your books, and I think it's good for us to engage with some of these things. I thank God for you, because it's like, well, at least you've kind of read and studied and researched and distilled it so that we can grapple with it in a way that I think we can understand. And I think it's great that you do what you do, and I really commend you in what you're doing. And what would be your hopes in this next season of your life?
That I would understand a little bit more about why we're here and how God wants to relate to me, and that I will be able to convey some of the results of my own grapplings to other people, because I think that we all are following, to some extent, similar roads. So, yeah, if I'm worried about these things, I imagine that other people are too, and if I can help them to avoid some of the more malignant doubts that I've had, all the better.
Well, I commend this book, Wired for God, by Charles Foster. It's a Hodder book, but you can Google Charles Foster and you can get all his other books as well. Charles, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Wonderful to speak to you.
Thank you
so
very much. Thank you.